TEDxCapeTown says, we change the world one room and one conversation at a time. And so the question comes, which one? The one I'm in right now. So I'm here today to have a world-changing conversation with you about one of the most critical issues facing our country. Let me just check in this room, who is concerned about the state of education in South Africa today? Clearly, a very informed audience. There was a survey done recently, and 50% of people said they're concerned. And it worries me because I really believe we all should be very concerned. So I thought I'll just start by reminding you of 4 of the really big reasons as to why education should be a national priority. There were many that I could have chosen, but I've chosen 4. The first one has to do with the World Economic Forum Global Competitiveness Report that's published annually. In this latest version, 2012, South Africa was rated number 131 out of 142 countries in the world with regard to basic education and health. That's a scary thought. We have about 26,000 schools, 25,000 to 26,000 schools in South Africa, of which 20,000 are deemed to be failing. So that's 80% of the schools in this country do not deliver the education outcomes that we need them to deliver. About 1 million children come into grade 1 every year. Of that million, only 500,000 make it to matric. Of that 500,000, only 200,000 actually manage to get an education that will enable them to live an economically sustainable life. That means that we are adding 800,000 young people to this pool of angry and disillusioned youth every year. The last reason is something that really scares me. This is a statistic that I heard recently from someone, it's a Deputy Director General from the Department of Basic Education. And she said to us in a meeting that 80% of the grade 5s in our country cannot read at grade level and will probably never be able to. Now that means that as a country we are becoming functionally illiterate. And that will impact every one of us. Now, we have 14 million children in South Africa's school system, and the reality is that all of our futures are inextricably linked to the futures of these 14 million children. We currently have this pool of angry and disillusioned youth. We are seeing the results of these youth being mobilized by people like Julius Malema, other people who are tapping into the passion and the discomfort and the unhappiness that's sitting in that group of people. And this is adding to a huge, to the high levels of systemic risk that we already have in our country. It's just escalating. And it's happening under our watch. So I believe that education has to be a national priority. It might even be more important than hosting a World Cup. Now, do you remember how we were all mobilized around hosting the World Cup? Some of us built the Gautrain, some of us were involved in building a stadium, but most of us knew that we each had a job to do. We had to wear a yellow jersey, be nice to the foreigners where they come, arrive at the fan park, go to a game. We were all there and we wanted South Africa to host this World Cup. Now, what if we were to mobilize ourselves in the same way around this education crisis? So we have to ask ourselves, what are we going to do? We have many options. We can get depressed. We can pack our bags, go to Perth and Montreal. We can work harder, make lots of money so that we can send our kids to private school and in hopes that somehow miraculously they won't have to deal with the fact that 80% of their peers will not be able to read. Or we can do something that we do very well in South Africa. Rampela calls this the fact that African people tend to be in a waiting state. She talks about subjects. We sit around and we wait for government, for aid, for traditional healers, for God, for the next Minister of Basic Education, and we complain bitterly about the state of the nation and how bad things are and how it's all going to pot. Now there's this wonderful, so South Africa is not the only country in the world that does that. There's a movie being made by the producer who made Inconvenient Truth, Davis Guggenheim, who lives in the US, and he realized that in the US, that people have known for 50 years that the education system is failing the children in the US. And for 50 years, they've been waiting for Superman. So Guggenheim felt it's his responsibility to let people know that Superman is a fictional character. He's not coming. And so the question that we have to ask ourselves is, what if we, in this room, are being called to be the change that we want to see in the world? What if the answer to the education crisis in South Africa lies here? Because it is our country, our children, and our future. And nothing's going to change until we start to realize that these 14 million children are our children. So I now walk around the world saying I've got 14 million children. I'm the mother of 14 million children. People say to me, you got your body back quite quickly. I say, I know, but it changes the conversation when I have a conversation with teachers or educators. I say, how many of my children are in your school? So I want to take you back to this World Economic Forum Global Competitiveness Report. In that same report, where we are number 131 out of 142 countries, we are also number 1 in the world with regard to our ability to implement corporate governance, and number 4 in the world with regard to our ability to develop financial markets. So why this discrepancy? How can we, and all of us are involved in the number 1s and the number 4s, how can we then live with the reality that our children and the people who are going to be the future workers and customers of our businesses are getting the kind of quality of education or lack of quality of education that we're seeing in South Africa at the moment? So what if we were to apply our extensive knowledge of leading change and our knowledge of how to make stuff work that we have to education? So we will do a root cause analysis, and I'm going to propose to you that there are 2 major reasons why we're in the situation we are. Firstly, is that the officials that are being asked to lead this major, most important transformation in our nation simply don't have the knowledge, skills, and experience of leading large-scale social change. It's not because they don't want to, it's not because they're fabulous people, they just simply don't have that knowledge. Secondly, and this has been beautifully described by an article that Nick Spalls recently wrote, there's this huge chasm between policy and implementation. So what we need desperately is more knowledge about how to lead large-scale social change and more local implementation knowledge and capacity. So I'm going to suggest to you, I'm going to offer a proposal for a partnership between government, business, and civil society that will lead to radically improved education outcomes in our country. But I do have to offer a warning. And I'm going to offer that warning, kind of just referring to a little bit of my own story. We lived a very comfortable life in the UK. We're a homecoming family. Came back, brought our 2 beautiful daughters back to this country, and were presented with the implications of that decision, realizing that things are really not the way it should be in this country. And that if I personally, who have a lot of knowledge of large-scale complex social change, choose to not get involved in this issue and continue to focus on my little narrow world of business, that these 2 kids will have the right to look at me and say, Mum, you knew. What did you do? Now, if you stay in this room right now, you're going to know too. And then that means you're going to be on the hook. So if you want to be off the hook, I know you're not supposed to leave, but this is the moment to quickly leave. Because if you're going to stay, you're going to be culpable too. So here it is. And I'm not seeing people leaving, so I'm hoping that means that you're in for the challenge. So if we're going to tackle this challenge, we have to say to ourselves, how do you change a system with 20,000 failing schools? We do that 1 school at a time. No amount of changing at the Department of Basic Education level is going to make the difference if we don't have the local implementation capacity at every school. So what we need to do is we need to launch 20,000 change projects. Now we know how to launch change projects. We've been doing it forever. So we know we have to do it in a sustainable way. We can't just do what's happening all over the country at the moment, where everybody's kind of, coming up with the latest idea and dumping that on the school, IT labs or, some kind of maths and science lab. That's not the answer. We need to do this in a sustainable way. So we need to create readiness for change in every one of our schools. We need to do those baseline assessments, co-create the vision, get the community engaged. We need to develop the plans. I mean, these are things that we do all the time. I'm teaching grandma to suck eggs when I tell you about this stuff. You know how to do this. You do this daily. Why can't we apply this knowledge in our education system? Why are we leaving our principals to struggle and suffer on their own? So we know that in every change project, readiness is the most critical phase. And when I talk about readiness, I talk about leadership and team and capacity. And I'll come back to these ideas. But we also know that the readiness phase is the most important and is foundational for everything else. And we know that the biggest challenge is the local implementation capacity. And this is where you guys come in. Because our school principals, who are the change leaders and who are being asked to do an impossible task, anybody in this room who knows a school principal, I'm not talking about school principals in the well-resourced schools, but do you know a school principal who are working on the Cape Flats or in any of our previously disadvantaged, I hate that word, but in our areas that are not as well-resourced, do you know what an impossible task we're asking those people to do? They're being asked to be everything, from being the bursar to the event manager to the librarian to the IT technician. There's just no resources for these principals, and they have such an important task. So we need to equip and support them for these tasks. I want to tell you one story. I had a principal in a workshop with me this week, and he stood up at the end of the workshop and he said, we're doing this as part of our Partnership for Possibility process, and he stood up at the end of the workshop and he said, I want to tell you, Louise, that I've been an educator for 30 years. 15 of those I've been a principal, and I have never had the opportunity to attend a 2-day workshop of this quality in my 15 years as a principal and 30 years as an educator. And I'm thinking, how does that happen? How is it that all of you get the opportunity to attend workshops and courses all the time, all of us, and our principals who are being asked to do this impossibly difficult task are not being supported? So I believe that the best people to support these principals are the people who have the knowledge and experience of leading large-scale change, people like the people in this room. So we have come up with this idea of what we call Partnerships for Possibility. It's an opportunity for business leaders to be partnered in a co-learning and co-action partnership with school principals. It's a uniquely South African innovation for South Africa and for the world, and we're starting to see some dramatic impact. Not just one way, not just the school principals learning from the business leaders, but we're seeing the lives of business leaders being changed as they go and they grapple with some of the most difficult issues in the school principals, working hand in hand, rolling up their sleeves and working with the school principals. So a little bit more about how this works. In year one, we ask we call them PFPs, Partners and Principals for Possibility, to facilitate readiness for change at the school. We do that through looking at these 3 aspects. One is, can we get the principals to move out of this position of disengagement and disillusionment that we find them in, and remind them of their capacity to lead change at these schools? And we see this happening everywhere we're working at the moment. And that happens because we have a business leader working as a co-learning, co-action, thinking partner to the school principals. And principals are just finding the oxygen to breathe in the presence of someone working with them in that way. We then know, the other thing that we've been astonished by is that when you go into these schools, so few of our schools have had any team development being done. Now, all of us working in business knows how important team development is. So imagine if you were the partner to a school principal and you work at that school and you discover that team development is the big challenge. You know 10 people who can do team development. All you need to do is to phone up a friend and say, would you be willing to come and help me work with this team? So we're starting to get to this place where we're mobilizing South Africans and we're asking them to bring their unique skill and capacity to the school. If you know how to do team development, why are you painting a wall? Because actually we're already not very good painters. And sending me off to work in a soup kitchen, I'm not a very good cook either, but ask me to go and facilitate a team session, and I can do a fabulous piece of work. And that's every person in this room have a unique skill and capability that we need to mobilize and bring into our schools for the sake of our 14 million children, 12 million children. Lastly, is this big challenge around community engagement. Now, our parents are disengaged. Most of our parents are not even near the schools. The reality is our kids are awake 5,800 hours a year. Of that time, they only spend 1,200 at school, not in the classroom, at school, which means that that's only 20% of their awake hours. Now, what we have done is we as a nation have abdicated responsibility for the 80%, and we keep dumping on the education department for the 20%. So when these principals and business leaders start to mobilize the community discover that they have a unique contribution to make. And their sense of contribution and self-worth rise dramatically every time when they are invited to bring those skills and capabilities and contribution to the school. We we ask these business leaders and principals to make the key focus of that first year active citizenship. And when we say active citizenship, we're asking everybody to show up as active citizens. Principals, teachers, parents, community, your personal network, the people in your network who know how to lead, do team development sessions or come and offer some advice on career evenings or whatever it is that we're trying to do. We cannot continue to wait for Superman. These are our children, our future, our country. Our key performance indicator is shining eyes, because we know that when kids are in the presence of shining eyes, we have high energy and our children are learning, and our principals show up every day with a big smile on their face and they're ready to tackle the difficulties facing that school. We hear our principals say, having a business leader has given me oxygen to breathe. So we ask our partners for possibility to stay in, to get involved, to make a commitment for the long run, so to help with the readiness, but also with that baseline assessment and implementation and everything else. So it's not just a quick fix, come in and leave. We're asking you, every one of you, to commit 3 to 5 years, next 3 to 5 years of your life, to each of you get involved with one school. Now that means we've got 600 schools covered. And we will see the impact, we'll see the results of that. So right now we have 56 school principals working with 56 business leaders. We're touching the lives of about 40,000 learners at the moment. We have business leaders from lots of different organizations actively working. Their lives are being changed. And our vision is that by 2017, we want 2,000 business leaders working with 2,000 principals. That's 10% of our school population. So the question is, are you ready? Are you ready to be a partner of possibility? Are you ready for this life-changing, purpose-filled journey, the opportunity to be the contribution that you're destined to be? I want to leave you with 3 final thoughts. One is, if it's not us, then who? If not now, when? Or in the words of our own beloved Madiba, it's now in our hands. This country is in our hands. The future of our children is in our hands. And remember that if you choose not to be involved, not to get involved, that your children will be able to look at you and say, Mum, Dad, you knew. So I want to invite you, join us, sign up as a partner for possibility, be the change, be the contribution you're destined to be, because it is our country, our children, and our future. Thank you.